disabled that. Okay, so the idea here, so the task then is to say we want to make a macro that says, hey, whatever active cell I'm on, build me a label for this vendor. And then once we've got that, we can use it a couple of ways. We can write a loop that would go through and say, give me build me the list of labels for all the vendors. Or I can go through and say, I'm going to send something to some of these guys, select this one, build the label, select this one, build the label, select this one, build the label, and I'm okay, so back to module 1, and I'm going to call this make vendor label. It'll be a sub-procedure called make vendor label. All right, so our first task here is we've got to figure out where on that sheet we're going to put the label. So talk to me. How do we know where the label goes? Looking over here at my label sheet, I'll get us started. It's going to go in column 1, column number A. We're going to build the labels in column A. But how do I know which row to put it in? Any thoughts?
I would go first available, and then after that, go to the bottom and go one row down.
Okay, so one thought is, come to the first available, meaning the first blank one from the top.
Yeah, I would start at A1, obviously. But then after that, I would find the very bottom, and then I would add a space, and then I would insert the next one.
Okay, so you're saying find the bottom of the data, wherever it is, and then give us a little more space and move on. Okay, so how do we find the bottom of the data? If we, let me go ahead and say we've got some labels in here. So here's label 1. Here's also label 1. I've got some labels in here. How am I going to be able to tell when I found the end? Because I've got blank row here. So like control down doesn't do it for me because it kind of moves me to the next block. Any thoughts? I want to come down here. I want to find 17. That's where I kind of added data. Any thoughts?
Did you start from the bottom and say first up?
Yes. So hey, I'll go to the very bottom and then come up until I hit anything. And that'll be the very last data. Yeah, so for some reason, we tend to think about this, start at the top and work down until we find it. But for this particular approach, it's going to be way better. Start at the very bottom and then come up. The problem is my finger can get tired scrolling 1.02 million rows. How are we going to do it? So let's do it through code. So we haven't talked about variables yet. That's coming up. I'm going to create a variable. In brief terms, a variable is just a place that I can store a value and then bring it back later. We'll talk about the data types of variables later. But today, we're going to say dim. That's how I make a variable. I'm going to call it row. That's all I'm going to say. That's enough. We're going to get more complicated with the dim statement later. Here we're just saying, give me a variable. It's going to be called row. And now I'm going to find out what row has the last data in it. Row equals. Now, the sheet that I'm working on is going to be the sheet named labels. I've named it labels. So out of all the sheets, the one named labels. There's one way to refer to that sheet. I'll show you another way in just a minute. Let's go ahead and get this line done. Now on that sheet, I want to refer to a particular cell. So cells, some column, we'll come back to that in a minute. Sorry, some row, we'll come back to that in a minute. Column number 1. How do I tell it the very last row?
You do control down.
I could do control down, but the problem with that, and it's the end statement. We're going to play with that in just a second. The problem with that is that that's going to bump into data on the way down. That's the problem. I gotta say I'm trying to get past all that data. There's going to be line breaks and everything in it. So I want to just jump right to the very last cell in this column. It turns out that I can ask. There's a collection of all the rows, and I can ask how many there are. Rows.count will tell me how many rows there are. On which worksheet?
Are these empty rows or just available?
This is how many rows there are. This is how many rows. Now, I haven't told it which worksheet, and so it's going to assume the active worksheet. Do I have a different number of rows on different number of sheets? probably okay with this. So I can just say rows.count, and I can plug that number right here. Put that expression right here. That just says however many rows there are, that's the row I want to go to. Which column? Column number 1. And this then is going to, this whole expression here refers to a particular cell. It's the very last cell in that column. From there, we talk about, I think we recorded using the end key, didn't we? Or using the like control up arrow or control down arrow. Did we do that in this class? We may not have. Okay. So let's record this next part so that we can kind of see where the code would come from. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to go ahead and start down here at the very end. Control N will take me down there. It's pretty exciting, I know. So let's go ahead and record a macro. All I'm going to do is record myself doing control up arrow. That's it. So record. You can do this along with me, or you can just watch. The code that it generates is going to be really easy to type. But the point is, I want to get us in the practice of saying, gosh, I don't know how to do that. Let's record ourselves doing it, and we'll take a look at the code. I'll call it macro 1. It's a great name. And I'll just do control up arrow. It took me up to the last cell, actually the one that has the data in it, and I'll stop. Now, every time I start recording, after I open the workbook, it'll generate a new module for it. So I've got to move to module 2 to find this. And there it is. It says, hey, from whatever is selected, we're going to execute the end method, and we're going to give it an argument of XL up. Now, XL up is actually a built-in constant. It doesn't have quotes around it. It's not a string literal. It's the name of a number. XLUP. It's negative 4,162. This would work exactly the same if I put in negative 4,162. It's called a constant, and it is just a named value built into Excel. And then we select it. But the point is, from whatever range we have selected, we call the end method, tell it which direction we want to move, and then we're in good shape. So I'm going to copy that part right there. And I'm going to bring it back to module 1. And so this gets me to the very last cell in that sheet, in that column. That is going to move me up until I hit blank data. And I'm going to ask for, better say +1. Because that's going to, not +1. I want to know the row that that's referring to. So let me just take that. I'm going to print this down here in the immediate window. So that tells me that we're talking about 16. So if I go back and look at my data, I should see that in fact, yeah, the last data is there on 16. So do I want to start on 16? No, 16 is dangerous. I want to start where? I want to start one more from that for sure, and maybe make some other adjustment as well. But that's going to get me to the very first. Let me say this. The first empty cell for which there are no filled cells below it. This should be an easier way to refer to that cell. So that just tells me the row. So I'm going to store that number 17 in this variable right here. And then I can use that to say, okay, I'm going to do several things, and with that, that's where I'm starting. Go ahead.
Now, you could do the same thing just by taking row and then on the next line saying row.indXL up. Or row equals indXL +1, whatever.
Didn't quite.
Sorry, so you could do the same thing by saying on the next line, row equals
Here?
row.indXL up +1. With that.
Help me modify what you're.
So just get rid of the whole sheets.cells part and just write row.
Oh, yeah. No, not at all. Just like this? No.
Yeah, no, row.indXL up +1. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Like the whole end part of it, yeah. And then get rid of it on the top one. Does that do the same thing?
Get rid of it here?
Get rid of up on the first row. No, the indXL up part +1.
Okay, no, it won't.
It won't do the same thing. So it's not like
Let me explain what's happening here. We could do something similar to this, but here's the problem. Oh. The answer is kind of a complex answer. I don't think you're ready to hear the answer yet. My intention with this variable here is to just hold a number. So let me force it to say it can only hold a number. Okay, so now I've limited what this variable can do to say it can only hold a number. And so that's going to work okay for here because I'm finding a particular cell, and I'm asking for the row of it. That's going to be like 16. It's a number.
So it's not an object.
It is not an object.
Gotcha. Okay. You can't do functions on this.
That's right. So this number has no methods. It doesn't have an end method. It's just a number.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, if we made this into an object and we'll learn how to do it, then we could do something similar to that, but not with the way that we're working. Okay. So let's just say that we want this only to start. You want this label only to start on rows that are multiples of 5. That's part of what we have to do is we have to get the spacing right so that when we print this thing, it lines up onto the labels. So, any thoughts on how to do that? How can we tell if something's a multiple of 5, mathematically? Divide it by 5 and what?
See if it's a whole number.
See if it's a whole number. Or if the remainder is 0. Fortunately, there's a function built into almost every programming language that will just tell you, I divide these two numbers, what's the remainder? In math lingo, I think that operation is called modulus or modulo. I've kind of seen it either way. And it's almost always abbreviated mod. When we're talking about it, we'll just call it mod. 7 mod 5 will give us the remainder when we take 7 and divide it by 5. What would that be, by the way? 2, very good. So if I take 7, and the way I do it in VBA is mod 5, that'll give us the remainder when I divide 7 by 5. And so what I want to do is I want to adjust this, once we find it, to the next multiple of 5. So right now, this is going to be 17. I mean, the way this is set up right now, that's going to be 17. And so I've got to add 2 onto it. So I can just do this. I'm going to change row now to a different value. It's going to be equal to, so remember, after we run this line, row is going to be 17. And I want to just take that number, mod 5. Question?
Sorry, would you say the mod 5 is what tells the code to divide it by 5, right?
So, yeah, let's take a look at this. So if I say 17 just divided by 5, give me 3.4.
Okay.
I can say, you know what? I don't want to do that kind of division. I want to do, it's called integer division. I want to do the division that says, you know what, how many whole times does it go in, and then what's left over. And so I can do the integer division portion of that by using the other slash, the backslash instead of the forward slash. And that tells me the 3 part of it. And then if I change that with the mod operator, it tells me the remainder.
So then on the row, wouldn't you have to say 5 minus the remainder?
Yeah, that's what I was
You would add 5 minus the remainder.
Yes.
That's what I was getting at.
Yes,
You
yes,
said
yes, yes,
plus earlier, but that wouldn't work.
You're saying plus 2, which would give you 19. But you
Right.
have 20,
You want to
so
take 2 away. That was my question.
Yeah, stand by. We're going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, we're headed. So the point is that this evaluates to 17. And so I'm going to take 17 mod 5. And so let's just think about that. If I'm right on a multiple of 15, on a multiple of 5, what's the mod going to be? 0. Well, that should be okay. But now let's suppose I'm on 17. If I'm on 17, this is going to give me 2, and I need to move 3, right? And so I think you're right that what we have to do here is we want to say row equals what it used to be plus 5 minus that whole expression. It's a little more involved than I meant it to be, but I'm going to run this right to that point. Folks, while we're at this level, this kind of beginning here, I'll get you in just a second. What I want you to do is just put a breakpoint right here on end sub. A breakpoint says, hey, we're going to execute along, and before we execute the line that I put the breakpoint on, just stop and suspend everything right there. So I'm going to put a breakpoint there. I put the breakpoint just by clicking in the margin. Now I should be able to run this. It should run right to there, but now the key is I can actually ask what is row right now. Right now row is 20. I like that because on 17, 20 is the next multiple of 5, it's still pretty good. Question? Your question right here? No?
No, it was done.
Okay. Okay, so now let me just put a couple of comments in here. So this line is going to find the first of the open cells after the data. Column 1. This one's going to adjust it to the next multiple of 5. Okay, so the good news is at this point, I now have the row that I've got to start writing the label out on. That's good. So now I just got to write the label. So I'm working on my sheet that's called vendors. Now, folks, I changed the code name. There's 2 ways I can do this. You can see that I can refer to a sheet by its name on the tab by saying sheets, and then in quotes the name. But if I've given it a code name, then I can refer to it directly by that code name. So I'm going to refer to my vend sheet using the code name. I'll refer to my label sheet using the label or using the name on the tab. So what I want to do here is I want to say that sheet label dot cells row number row column number 1 dot value.
Wait, labels or vend?
Now I'm writing to the label sheet, and I'm going to read a value off of the vend sheet. I need vend here as well in just a minute. But what I did here was I just calculated where I'm going to write the label. And so I'm going to use row to refer to a particular cell on the label sheet. With the assignment statement then, I am going to read something off of the vend sheet. I could say it this way. Sheets, vend. Vendors, V-E-N-D-O-R-S. That's the name on the tab. Or I can refer to it by its code name directly. Vend dot cells. Now a particular cell. Which cell, as I look over here at my vend sheet, do I want to pull in? I want to pull in the contacts information. How am I going to get that? Let's start off just by putting it in for this one. So this is J4, and then we'll make it a little bit more general. So cells row number 4, column number J, and I want the value of that. Incidentally, folks, when I'm in break mode, I can drag that yellow arrow right back up to the line I want to run. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. This needs to be, that was your question here in the front, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This needs to be just like this. So I'm referring to labels using the sheets collection. I'm referring to my vendors using its code name. So I should just be able to run that.
You should just call sheet 1.
Right, it has a code name, sheet 1. I can use a sheet 1 as well. The whole point is we're trying to see 2 different ways to refer to those worksheets. So now I've run that line, and that has brought in Carol Reynolds onto A20. But the problem is, it's always going to bring Carol Reynolds. So how do I tell it, no, not Carol Reynolds, but whichever one I'm currently looking at? How do I change this line to say I just want to know the row that has the active cell? I can ask for the, I can just ask, the active cell is an object, and I can ask for the row of that. And so I will just plug that in right where the 4 used to be. Now, active cell is going to be depending on whichever worksheet is active. So maybe what we should do at the very start of this, maybe do it right here. Let's make sure that then sheet is active. Then dot active. Make sure the vendor sheet is active. And then this line is going to copy over the okay. So far so good. Questions? Okay, at this point I'm going to pause and make sure that we are all together. So if you're not getting this to execute, this is the time when you let us know, and we have Cameron here, we'll come around. If it's more than one person, I'll come around too. And you know, if you feel like you know what, I'm not with you, but I'm too shy, that's okay. I'm you to do it. But the example will go better if this is working for you. Anyone need help? Here in the back.
What was the problem when we tried to rename certain sheets and it won't let us? The invalid property value.
So you're trying to rename a sheet.
I've got a bin sheet already, but I'm trying to turn the label sheet into labels.
So you're trying to have this one selected and change the name to say labels.
Yeah.
It could be. Let's see if I get the same error. I'm able to rename it. One problem is if you use a reserved word, but I'm not sure what else it might be. Question? Okay, so the question is how to run the module. Folks, I want you to listen to the answer. You don't ever run a module. A module just holds procedures. And so you run procedures. Right now, the only way we've got to run this, well, there's a couple. The way I'm running it is by having the insertion point inside the procedure and then clicking the play button in Visual Basic. Now it's got a name, make vendor label, labely. So if I come back to my developer tab, I can come to my list of macros and that should show up here. So I can run it this way. Heck, I could assign it a hotkey, which I'll do right now. So I went to the developer tab. I chose list of macros. Over here on the left, choosing the macros. A little more slowly. Developer tab, choosing the list of macros. Select the one I want to change. Come to options. And now, click options here. Now I should be able to put a control, capital L. Now control shift L should take the label that or the vendor I'm currently on and add that vendor to the list of labels. So we at least change the context. So if I come here and select this one, who am I expecting to get? Brittany Poon. Control shift L. And a breakpoint, so let's pause my code there. Let's take a look at it. Now we've brought in Brittany Poon, and we've offset to the next multiple of 5. That feels pretty good. We still got to put the rest of the label in here. Now we've got it, so we've got a hotkey assigned to it, so that we can say, pull this one, pull this one. Question?
What if your form is empty already?
What if the form is empty already?
Yeah, what if your label form has no data?
Oh, completely blank.
Right.
Well, we're going to go to the first multiple of 5, which is 5.
Okay.
You want to start on 1? You want to start on 1, we want to be multiples of 5. So, ultimately, I guess we could kind of adjust that and go to multiples of 5 plus 1. Start at 1 and then go 6. And by adjusting our code, we can do it. Okay, folks, the next part, in-class exercise, put another line here that will bring in the first address. So there's 2 address lines. There's address 1 and address 2. There's always an address 1 line, so give us an address 1 line, Then we'll take a look at what we've got to do for the address 2 line, because we don't want to put an address 2 line unless there's an address 2. But now take a moment, add another line. It's going to be really similar to what we have here. Just modify it so that you make it bring in that second line, or the second line of the address label, which is the first address. And then once you've got that, you look at me really smug, so I can come and see. Just have a smug look.
You set this up on, you didn't set this up on an on-click, did you?
On who?
On an event.
No. This is just, the only thing I did was I assigned a hotkey to it.
You got the active cell, and you move that over to your sheet.
That's it. They don't have that done yet? Yeah, let's take a look. Question or you got it? Got it? Actually, there's two changes we have. So when I was on Brittany, whom next one below it should show the row we wrote as was. Questions? No, we want Sure. So what we want is we want the name and then the next row right below it, not 5 spaces down, the next row right below it, we want to have the address. All right, let's take a look, folks. All right. So I'm going to copy this line because it's going to be extraordinarily similar to what this line does with 2 changes. So remember that when we have an assignment statement, that this equal sign here, we are taking whatever is on the right-hand side of that, we are putting it into whatever is on the left-hand side. So on this line, we are looking at row number 20, or whichever our row is, and we're going to put whatever's in column J. Now, we want to look at which row for this next one. If we're on number 20 for this one, where do we want the address to go? 21, we want the next one. So we're just going to say, listen, whatever the row is, we want to put +1. And instead of bringing the name again, we don't want what's in column J, we want what is in column C. So now we're saying, whatever is in column J, put it in row, and whatever is in column C, put it in the next one down. I'm going to do one thing a little bit differently here. I'm going to do this in 2 lines. Instead of putting row +1 here, I'm going to leave that as row, and I'm going to change the value of row right here. Row equals 1 more than it used to. So this is just going to allow me to say, every time I'm writing to row, and I'll have a separate line that allows me to see that I'm changing the row that I'm writing to. If I didn't have to deal with a possibly blank address 2, I probably would just do row +1 in here. Now the next one's a little difficult because I'm only going to write to it, and I'm only going to change it if there's something to write. Right, so if I look at this, let's go ahead and open up address 1 so we can see that there's, most of these don't have an address 2. And the whole thing we're trying to accomplish is a well-formed address. Address line 1, if there's an address 2, then put address line 2, and then put the city, state, and zip. But if there's no address line 2, don't put a blank line for it. And so I'm going to copy this line again, this pair of lines now. And here, you'll just put a comment out here. This is address line 1. This one's going to be for address 2. Now, but the trick is, I only want to do these 2 lines where I increment the row and write the value out if there's something to write. So let's go ahead and write where we want it to write. Let's assume for right now that there is. So instead of column number C, it'll be column number D that we're pulling the value from. So if there is a value, this is what we want. Add 1 to the row, and then pull the value from column number D. But we only want to do that if there's something there. How do we find out if there's something there? Well, this expression right here refers to that column. I can just look at that and decide. So again, there's a little peek ahead to a thing called the conditional statement, which we're going to spend a lot of time on. But for right now, let's just put an if statement in here. If, just put in the raw syntax. If, then, and if. So I'm going to say if, and then I will have something here that evaluates it true or false. If it's true, we execute these lines. If whatever's between the if and the then is false, we jump to the end if and keep moving. We skip right past these lines. And all I want to do is I want to say if that value that I'm looking at is not equal to a 0-length string. Quote, quote. This says there's something there. I'm saying if that's not blank, there's something there, then write that out. Increment my row, write out to the row, and then move on. Question?
So if there is an address there, but there's a space, one space, then it wouldn't catch it, correct?
If there's you mean if there's an address or if there's just a space there?
So if there's an address in there, but the address begins with a space because of an input error,
Yeah.
or because of an enter error, how the address enters into the register.
Yeah, so the question is this going to be a problem if the address starts with a space? And the answer is no, it'll be just fine. Because a space, I'm asking if the whole thing is different from an empty string. Even if it's just a space, it'll print the line for the space. Now, you might say if there's a space, we don't want to print just a line for a space, and we could address that. We'll talk about that when we talk about string functions. There's functions we can use to say, if there's a space, ignore it. But that's not for today. So now, when there is I'm going to go ahead and take out my breakpoint. When there is something to write for line 2, it should write it. And when there's not, it shouldn't. So I'm going to come back here and find one that's, so here's one without. Control-Shift-L. Here's one that is. Control-Shift-L. And we'll take a look at my labels. So yeah, we got Jacqueline with only address 1. And then we got Peyton with address 2. Now you really couldn't tell if it worked because it still starts at the next increment of 5. How do we know if it didn't write the thing out there? We won't really know until we write the next value. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we'll see it right in the complete address, and we'll feel good. Okay, so the only thing that's different about this next one is that I'm writing more than one cell. My source has more than one cell, and my destination is still only one cell. So again, I'm going to increment row, so I'm going down to the next row. And so labels at whatever row I'm on will be great. So now I want to write the city, which is in column number E. So I want to write E, F, and G out here. So column E. But I want to concatenate onto that a space. Then I will concatenate on the next part. Now, the trouble is this is going to get too long to be able to see it all. So, you can just keep writing on the same line if you want, but I'm going to break it into multiple lines so we can see it all on the screen. Put a space and an underscore that continues the line below. Should say it continues the statement on the next line. And then I want to put F with a space. And then I want to put G. So I'm saying here, I'm writing something into this cell, and what's it going to be? It's a long expression. It's whatever is in my current row for column E, plus a space, plus whatever is in F, plus a space, plus whatever is in G. The ampersand is just saying, hey, glue on to it the next expression. Underscore here is saying, okay, we're going to break this statement onto multiple lines. So now we should be able to run that multiple times and bring that in. In fact, just to make this a little bit better, I'm going to increment down one row. So after I add the label, I'm going to assume you want the next one. I'm going to put you onto the next row down. Active cell, dot offset, one row, no columns, dot select. So now I should just be able to Control L, Control L, Control L, and I should add some labels in. I'm going to clean this off, go back to my vendors. And Control L, Control Shift L. Control Shift L. We now have our addresses always starting on increment of 5. When there's 4 lines, it takes up 4 lines. Otherwise, it takes up just 3. Okay, just for kind of a little check for myself, how many of you are going, this isn't too bad? How many of you are going, this is witchcraft? Okay, so if you're kind of on the edge of saying, wow, this was kind of tough to follow today, now's the time to come and see me. I'm in my office a lot. Spend some time with Cameron. Work through this. Because kind of understanding at this point, these statements, these are fairly complex expressions that we have here. My mouse is gone. And my recorder has stopped. I don't know how much we got. This stuff is pretty complex. And it's going to get more complex as we go. And so now is the time to say, hey, let's get on a solid footing, get to where we can look at these lines and say, okay, I'm following this, I'm seeing what it's doing. Questions? Yes?
Why do we have the active cell offset at the end? Sorry, I missed that.
This active cell offset, this just makes it easier for me to make multiple labels. It says, hey, after I put a label on, it's going to just move the active cell down one row. So that if I can just hit Control L, Control Shift L, Control Shift L, Control Shift L, it'll do 3 different labels. It's just kind of getting me set up for the next label. I'm not sure I would really want that there, because if I'm going through and picking the person, I probably want to leave it there, pick it and have it stay on that line.
Oh, it's moving it on the value.
This is moving it on the vendor's sheet.
Okay, so it grabs each one.
And that really is just so that I can add multiple ones in there. Other questions? Folks, the book in chapter 4 introduces the message box statement. We had a little preview of it today in an earlier example. I'm going to assume that you kind of follow the message box statement. We're not going to dive into it. If you want to go review the chapter on that, you can. Last thing before we go, I had a student come to me last week and said, Professor Allen, I'm spending so much time preparing for this class, reading all the chapter, trying to work the examples. And what did I say to him? No, I said, you're reading the chapters? Well, bless you, my son. I would never do that. I'm just kidding. So I'm giving you those chapters so you'll know the content that we're going to cover. If, in your approach to studying, it helps you to kind of review that, maybe not try to understand the whole thing before you come to class, but maybe spend a few minutes kind of looking at it, seeing, and kind of have the feeling for what we're doing. But if you come to class and you haven't read the chapter, I'm okay with that. It's not that I'm expecting that you've got all the knowledge from the chapter. That's what I'm covering in class. So, just, use that if it helps you to prepare for class. Spend some time with it before. If not, that's okay too. All right? Thanks for coming. Remember, we've got homework due Wednesday, and I've got to get it, make sure that it's dismissed. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed.
Good to see you. How are you? Big week for you. Sure. I'm not getting fired up. That's good.
Having made me promise I wouldn't I'll give you a cookie. What's the cookie I'm keeping you awake? I can't eat a lot. How much of it did you do versus average? Just here for like 12 hours. Oh, really? Hey, but I'd like to run a kid over. Yeah, so. I have a big piece of work due Wednesday for the job, so I'll probably be more free Thursday and Friday. What's your schedule like? Friday after 3 p.m. Or I could do. I'll talk to you sometime. Yeah, let's do it. Awesome. Let's do another good Friday morning, I'm just on like 40 minutes on. Yeah, let's do it. That's fine. Yeah, it's ready to maximize your time. Yeah, that'd be like 7:20. Yeah. Are you up? Yeah. Okay, so 20 on Friday. Maximizing time when you're driving is my favorite thing. Totally. I'll be on the phone. Yeah. Okay. Just 7:30, so you have time to like get on. Let's do it, man. We're excited. How's everything coming along? Good. Ready? I'll play more. Dude, it's one of those things that like you do 1,000 pieces of fun. It's like it just depends. It's just crazy. It's like so many kids, and I'm like, I just should not have gotten walking out of my interview, I was like, no way that I get that one. Really? I got it. It's like, no matter how well you think you did or how well, it's just different things that I don't even know still. On this side of that, I don't even know. So, that's cool. All right. Cool. It'll be great. Talk to you Friday. All right. Can you send me a link? Send me a link for that? Yeah. I got